And one of the fascinating things for me was to get these letters from Eileen McAlpine, which opened up a whole dimension of physical mediumship to me. Because for me, again, my stock response, again, before I got involved in some of these subjects, was it's all mumbo jumbo. It's all smoke and mirrors. And some of the, as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, you look at these ghastly, grotesque photographs of 100 odd years ago, ectoplasmic manifestations. Oh my God, save me from that. But what is really going on? So I was delighted to get, out of the blue, a letter from Eileen McAlpine. 1926, 2017. That was Eileen in the 1950s. A little bit of background about her. Again, the caution from Martin and Augustine as we go into this enchanted field, keep sane. Remember what the stock position is. She's sent me lots of letters about physical and mental mediumship. The early ones were about her own experiences with people like Matthew Manning, her own out-of-body projections. And in no particular order, these are quite interesting and may resonate with a number of experiences of other people. Notice he drew a flower with petals and a smiley face in the middle. I drew virtually the same, but I saw them as ears, not petals. And I noticed some research that Adrian has done over the years on telepathy with Ramsden and Miles and so on, how you never quite, very rarely get it exactly. You get a whole range of associations clustering around the original object, and you could go off on that tangent. And again, the same thing with mediumships. Something is coming through from what source one doesn't know, and it's how you decode it and how you interpret it. And a lot of training could well be involved in order to control and explore these impressions. This is something that, before we get onto the physical, that raised alarms in me. I came back, she used to live in Sutton, with Richard Dancer, one of the College of Psychical Studies mediums on the train coming home. He lives in Sutton like me. Why did he think that demonstrators in public meetings who were very good were disappointing in private ones? He says, when I go into a hall with a number of people, I know that someone will have a communicator who will get to me, but in a one-to-one contact, I have no idea whether I'll get a good contact. That raised huge alarm bells in my mind, because I have been to a number of physical demonstrations, and I have seen medium almost bully a member of the audience to take the to take the message. Well, you don't know about it now, but when you get home, have a think about it. And then secondly, there are a lot of claim grabbers. A general statement comes out, and 9 or 10 people might, it might refer to me. Now, I've had 2 recent experiences. One with Colin Fry before he died, demonstration near the British Library, and one very recently with my wife when we sat with, when we were in a large group at the College of Psychic Studies. Gordon Smith was there, and Gordon Smith has got a very high reputation. But again, on both occasions, the claim grabbers came out. In our particular case, some very specific information was given about my wife, but then Gordon Smith moved on to talk about, I see a Scottish connection. Oh, blimey, my name's Hamilton, and the chap immediately behind, me, and there was a huge overlap between the information that was coming through about him and some of the stuff that could refer to us. So I'm not so keen on the kind of Eileen's experiences in the mental mediumship area. I am interested in her own personal experience of out-of-body state. And again, the same thing, you don't tell people about this, they think you're bonkers. I haven't spoken to many people of my out-of-body experiences for fear of being considered a delusion. I had many projections when I was young. Well, I've had 1 or 2 in adolescence, and I didn't really realise what they were. They can be quite distressing at first. this is an interesting description. During an appendectomy, I began to withdraw through my head, being completely rigid, until my inner feet were clear of the physical. I remained like that. Then I floated up, all on the automatic pilot, and became upright. I could see the surgeon and nurses around the operating table, but I wasn't interested in all that. Common theme, isn't it? You know, you're detached. The physical state is no longer important. I was more concerned about what was going to happen next. She was a great explorer, Eileen. She was very interested in these experiences. But the thing that struck me was the last one. I have never been without a body in any of my projections. Now, this is one of the problems when you get into the field of physical mediumship and survival in the physical sense. Going right back to Anthony Flew in the 1940s, the philosopher who wrote a great deal lucidly on psychical research, he and his colleagues said, this concept of survival is logically incoherent. You can't talk about the human personality without the whole body, brain, the whole embodied situation, because that's what we are. It's the interrelation between our mind and our body, our brain and our body, which makes us human. And take that body away, the body cremated or buried, you no longer have in any real sense a personality that can survive. But Eileen's saying that her experience is, I have got a body. What is that body? She went to to some of the early Skoll sittings. I've got all for his work, and there she is down, and Bernard is down there, sitting in Skoll, and she experienced a number of things directly. I'd been at the cellar in Skoll. I went up there in the early days, saw the moving light under which went through the small metal table, came up underneath with a terrific crash, and we spoke with the spirits. When you read Skoll from the outside, it does seem very impressive, but they never established the kind of controls that some people would have liked, and there's quite a strong criticism of Skoll in Light, summer 2012, about the belief system that develops even in highly impressive seance conditions. Another thing which interested me, she said, I don't think anybody knows much about Emily Bradshaw. I rang Robin Foy up and I said, who do you think Emily Bradshaw was? You know, obviously must have been a member of the SBR, and he wouldn't tell me. He said it's confidential. Well, I mean, that annoyed me a bit, you know, I wanted to ferret away. And I've got two suggestions. He said that she came from a wealthy aristocratic family, members of which are still alive. So I thought, right, Emily Bradshaw, there are only two contenders. One you've already mentioned in an earlier, one that was sort of mentioned earlier talk on precognition, Dame Edith Littleton, because there are many members of the Littleton family still alive, including a fellow of All Souls College, Oxford, and I wonder what he would think about a number of these, a number of his family being associated in this way. Maybe he would be very supportive. And the other, of course, is Winifred Coombe Tennant, who during her life was obsessively concerned about privacy. And you can understand why. She was a public civil servant, she was a magistrate, she did an enormous amount of work in a voluntary social service. She was a great campaigner for women's rights. Look how discredited she would have been had all this stuff come out. So refined accents could have either been Dame Edith Littleton or Emily, Dame Edith Littleton or Winifred Coombe Tennant. So that was her personal testimony. But then where it got really strange was her experience of physical mediumship. And she wasn't credulous. Credulous. She sat with William Olson, who I think was probably almost definitely fraud. We had to give our names when we booked. The trumpet came to me, and she had a lot of experience of trumpet phenomena, asking for Eileen, and her voice said, "We're all here." No, I mean, that is, you can see the fraud in that. Now, she sat with some pretty well-known mediums who did physical materialization. And I've got about 40 or 50 letters from her describing this phenomenon. The situation was we would have telephone conversations, I would type information occasionally, and she would write, we've talked about this before again in this conference, long old-fashioned letters, which were lovely to read. I didn't write letters because nobody could ever read my handwriting. It was completely illegible. And she sat with Colin Fry, again, the suggestion of fraud with regard to Colin Fry, in a garage in Dorking for a number of years before he became a mental medium. And she described some extraordinary phenomena. Not enough time, I won't spend too much time. And again, some of the questions, the statements that she made, take your breath away. I had a couple of chats with Gordon Higginson, nothing wrong with that, a few years after his death. So in other words, there were physical materializations, or sometimes direct voice statements that come onto that, and she and the other people in the cellar were convinced that this was physically, or aspects of physical, of Gordon Higginson. Now, he had a very distinctive voice. I've heard recordings of his voice, and it was very slightly lisping, almost over-refined voice, very well spoken. If you were waiting for him to arrive, you wouldn't need to turn around once you heard it. And she also sat with, and I don't know how many people know about this character, a very, very famous trance medium, healing medium, George Chapman. He originally came from my neck of the woods. He was an ophthalmologist, a surgeon, worked in London. He came from Exeter, and he worked through a fireman called George Chapman. And members of his family, when George Chapman was in trance, identified the personality of, I can't call him Dr. Lang, he was a surgeon, he was Mr. Lang, as definitely their uncle or their father or whatever. And she went to it's supposed to have produced a number of semi-miraculous healings. She went to him, and she'd had a train accident, and he cured her of the particular physical obstruction in her right eye. So there's a detailed description of that. Again, that's a physical impact on the world. And then she also was a great friend of Neville Wynand, one of the most famous, again, anecdotal accounts of impressive phenomena in history, is the noted Chinese scholar Neville Wynand going to a direct voice sitting, with, again, somebody who's been seen as a fraud, Valiantine, the semi-educated American salesman, who produced remarkable direct voice phenomena, in people coming through in many different languages. And he recognized a Confucius or Confucian, like, I apologize to our Chinese friends for this, my anglicizing of this, through the direct voice of Valiantine. And they had remember I mentioned earlier the importance of interaction. They had a discussion about an obscure program in a collection of classical Chinese literature, which Confucius had edited. And the voice went into the metaphors, the figures of speech, and elucidated them for Wynand. The only trouble with all this is there's no physical evidence for it whatsoever. There is just this highly intelligent, cultured man's account of what actually happened. To Wynand's credit, he said, I haven't the faintest idea what all this is about. I just recorded it, I heard it, identified a large number of other languages at that session, and take it from here. It's up to you guys, you scientists and psychologists. She he retired to Richmond in Surrey, and she gave a number of she had a number of sessions with him after his death, again through a good quality mental medium. Two of his great friends were F.T. Cheng, the pre-Mao ambassador to the UK, and Lionel Giles, keeper of Oriental books at the British Museum. She sat with a medium. Neville came through, and he said they were the first friends who greeted him after he died. And I said, well, you know, when I wrote to her about this, all well and good, but let's have some evidence. And she said, you want to know about statements which are objective? Here's one that Neville told me after death. He apologised for the fact that in his will, in which he left me a few objects of art objects and a small sum of money, this had been put aside on a technicality. He mentioned his executor by name. I later discovered this was true. I've got the name of the executor, but even 50 years later, obviously it's perhaps a little bit unwise to mention it. She sat with a lot of the physical mediums. David Thompson, some of you may have heard of him. Just like Colin Fry, the person is very securely tied up. Physical phenomena occur, materializations and so on, and then at the end of it, the medium is found to be tied up in a different way to the way that they originally were. Now, look at this. This is a friend of Eileen's who's still alive. Went to David Thompson seance. He heard a figure bound out of the cabinet and felt two arms on his shoulder, and when I rang this chap up, he said it was definitely him because he was almost a foot taller than me, and I sort of felt his presence and even his odour. Ex-old man, it's so good to see you again. Couldn't be anything other than him. A real problem, of course, is you get the physical phenomena. They give you evidence. They might say, I was X or Y in life. But when you track them down, they very rarely are. This is back to Adrian's Hungry Ghosts again. They very rarely are, it sounds very convincing, the person that you think they are. William, a lot of information about him and his life and when he lived and so on. And a very good genealogist who's also a medium in Australia, again, who Adrian knows, tracked down information about this guy from what, as far as he could, and said, the dates just don't fit. One of the things that puzzles me, David Thompson, and it's same at Skull, uses both the new energy as at Skull and ectoplasm. What the hell does the word energy mean in this context? It's a word I have great difficulty in coming to terms with, and how does it relate to materialization? She quite often said, I'll leave that one out. She was a staunch believer in ectoplasm. She said it did exist. It wasn't cheesecloth. She'd sat with Gordon Higginson. Gordon Higginson apparently was exposed, but cheesecloth was put under a seat at the Arthur Findlay College for him to take into the seance room. If I read Eileen's accounts, it's not, you might call sort of motivated seeing, phrase soft news, that you want to see something, and so you create what you want to see. Her descriptions were quite precise. The ectoplasm was much more filmy, much more delicate, it changed, it flowed, it was alive, not the kind of lump of inanimate phenomena you might see in certain places. And she saw Gordon partly materialise, and sometimes people are fully materialised. I then read Barry Colvin's article in Psi Pioneer, which cast a lot of doubt on this. Stuart Alexander, she saw the trumpet phenomena, impossible to fake, she argued, so high up. Skeptics would have a field day working out how it could be done mechanically as long as they weren't present. Everyone who was there would laugh at them. It's this battle between direct experience and what people might generally think. And again, linked to the theme of this conference, a thought came to me the other day. I wonder what you think. I found myself wondering whether consciousness is the ultimate reality and all material things are produced by it. But how do you get up from the very, very, very micro level where, in terms of quantum theory, there's some kind of possible basis for non-locality, right up to the macro level and the physical construction of these strange bodies. I don't think I'm going to bother about that, except just to say the last thing, a last point on that, keeping on the body theme. Many mediums, physical mediums, aren't bothered by this concept of a spiritual body. They argue that there is an etheric body, a parallel body, which is the real us, and the physical body is just an external manifestation of it. And everything that occurs, disease, health, a whole range of things, are there first, and then are just projected out into the physical world. And looking back in history, the Betty book, there are experiments there in Appendix 2 which actually show a number of mediums dematerializing their body and then replacing it with the spirit body. And these kind of things have never really been explored or developed. How you would do that, I don't know. But there is a lot of historical evidence on that subject. Just to round off with, it's an area I think, though I'm rather scared about it all, I might have to try and get involved, because the two tests, as I say, for identity, if you read Michael Sudduth or Stephen Browdy, the psychological identity is the same personality. Can you call it the same personality over time? The information you get from mental mediumship. And secondly, the physical thing. Are the claims valid? And finding a good physical medium who's not been tainted by fraud is incredibly difficult. I don't think anyone has ever suggested that Robin Foy is a Freudian. He's a really genuine, nice guy. And Stuart Alexander, who stopped doing demonstrations, absolute top quality medium, and again, a very nice, courageous man full of integrity. And Tom Harrison, who died recently, unimpeachable. Some of the material in his book, in his book on physical phenomena is absolutely remarkable. So it still exists, but it's a question of negotiating with the circle to get involved in it and coming with no preconceptions and obeying the rules. The very last thing I'd say is, in the 19th century, this lovely poem by, I've got the name, the great 19th century American, safe in their alabaster chambers, sleep the meek members of the resurrection. This idea that there is you're just frozen in time, and God will resurrect you in all your, if you want to be saved, in all your qualities when the time comes. That model of a complete physical resurrection is rather an uneasy one and rather a naive one. But at the same time, what is this model? Why do we need survival in that physical sense, a physical embodied sense? Is it still a religious sense pushing us to want to survive in that particular format? Maybe real survival is a mental survival in an interesting world of effortless and endless exploration of consciousness. And that seems to be where a number of people are going nowadays. So I'll stop. But I know I'm going to say one more thing, and that is, have I experienced any psychic phenomena with regard to the two people I'm talking about? Because having studied Maya so intensely, and Eileen fairly intensely, and becoming close friends with her, has anything occurred? Well, with regard to Maya's, in one of the mediumship sessions I had, the medium said, watch out for a loud rushing wind and a voice. A little while later, early morning hypnopompic imagery, I was lying in bed and suddenly there was a great whoosh outside and I'd forgotten all about this message, my right ear, and a voice shouted loudly, Fred. And of course, Fred Myers, in all his communications, would use that if he was fond or interested in the person. Secondly, Eileen, 1950s was her heyday. She was a young, very attractive woman, worked for the MOD, she was adopted. Her mother worked for Vogue, and so Eileen got all the clothes and so on from that source. At the mediumship session I went to recently, when I was investigating archives in the College of Psychic Studies, I decided to book in a session with a medium, and she said, as well as all the normal triggers in terms of my usual communicators, I have an elegant woman here from the 1950s who's right behind you, supporting you. You've written 3 books, and she's helping you with your further research. This is all the standard stuff, but it was quite an accurate description of Eileen. So these things run in parallel with your normal investigations. How much credence you give to them, I don't know. Thank you very much.